Everyone believed the billionaire's daughter had been born completely blind. For years, no one questioned it. Not the doctors, not the staff, not even her own father. She lived in silence, disconnected from the world, hidden away in a mansion full of secrets. But everything changed the day a new maid was hired. She wasn't a doctor or a specialist, just someone who paid attention. What she noticed during her quiet work around the house would unravel years of lies, challenge a powerful family's past, and bring to light a truth that had been buried since the day the little girl was born. What started as a job turned into a mission, and what she uncovered would shock everyone, especially the man who thought he had done everything to protect his only child. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Richard Wakefield was a powerful man in the agribusiness world, known for building a fortune through hard work and smart decisions. But behind his success, he lived a very different life at home. He stayed in a large, quiet mansion far from the city, where he lived alone with his daughter, Luna. The house was beautiful, with expensive furniture, wide glass windows, and long, empty halls, but it felt cold and lifeless. Richard had lost his wife in a helicopter crash 5 years ago, just days after Luna was born. That tragedy broke something inside him. He had chosen to live far from everyone else, not because he wanted peace, but because he couldn't face the world anymore. His entire life now centered around Luna. She was the only person he truly cared about, and he tried his best to give her everything she needed. But Luna's condition made things hard. From birth, doctors said she was blind. Richard blamed himself, and his days were filled with quiet routines, sadness, and constant worry about her future. Despite the mansion being filled with all kinds of luxuries and tools meant to help, Luna didn't seem to react much to anything. Richard had hired therapists, tutors, and even brought in specialists from around the world, hoping someone could reach her. But nothing changed. Luna rarely spoke. She didn't play. She didn't laugh. Most of her time was spent sitting alone, often by the large living room window, feeling the breeze and listening to distant sounds. Her eyes, though blind, always stared into space, never focusing on anything. It was like she lived in her own world, one that no one else could enter. Richard often sat across the room, silently watching her, feeling helpless. He read to her sometimes, told her stories, even played music, but she rarely reacted. Only once in a while she would tilt her head or frown slightly, and those small gestures were all he had to hold on to. He wondered constantly if she even knew who he was, or if she felt anything at all. At 42 years old, Richard looked older than his age. The sadness had taken a toll on him. His beard was turning grey, and his eyes looked tired most of the time. His movements were slow, thoughtful, like someone always carrying a heavy weight. He had grown distant from friends, cancelled meetings, and passed more business responsibilities to others. He couldn't bring himself to leave Luna for long. Every morning, he followed a strict routine. He helped Luna get dressed, made breakfast, and guided her through the day. He tried different things to connect with her, textures, smells, music, but nothing worked. He had moments of anger, blaming fate, doctors, or himself. He often looked at Luna and whispered apologies, as if she could hear the guilt in his heart. Even with all his money and knowledge, he couldn't fix what he saw as the biggest failure of his life: his daughter's pain and silence. The staff at the mansion was small and discreet. They respected Richard's privacy and barely interacted unless necessary. Most had worked there for years, watching Luna grow without much change. They talked quietly among themselves about her, sharing stories about little things they noticed, how she sometimes hummed softly at night, or how she reached out for the same stuffed toy every evening. But to Richard, those moments felt like tiny drops in a dry well. He wanted more. He wanted her to talk, to smile, to show that she was truly present. Sometimes he sat by her side and just spoke, telling her about his day, about memories of her mother, or even describing things happening outside. He hoped something he said would trigger a response. But Luna stayed mostly quiet, only nodding or slightly turning her head from time to time. Richard clung to those signs, hoping they meant more than they appeared. The house itself had become a symbol of everything Richard had lost. It was big enough for a family, but only 2 people lived there. Each room carried a memory or a piece of hope that never fully arrived. The nursery had never changed. It was still decorated the way his wife had designed it before Luna was born. Soft colors, animal patterns, a rocking chair near the crib. Richard had never touched it after the crash. Sometimes he stood there for a while, holding on to memories he couldn't let go. Luna never showed interest in the room. She didn't explore, didn't ask questions, didn't even seem to understand what it was. Richard had accepted this strange, quiet life, but deep down, he still believed something might change. He read every new study on child development, talked to new doctors, and tried new techniques. But each attempt ended in disappointment. Still, he refused to give up completely. And so the days continued, slow, heavy, and mostly silent. Richard remained committed to Luna, even though he barely slept and rarely felt peace. He still guided her hand during meals, held her gently as they walked through the garden, and whispered bedtime stories with a voice full of pain and love. Luna remained quiet, her face showing little expression, her gaze always blank and distant. Yet every now and then, she would rest her head against his chest, just for a few seconds. Those small moments gave Richard strength to keep going. He didn't know what the future held, but he had made a promise to protect her, no matter what. In that lonely mansion, filled with shadows of the past, Richard Wakefield lived each day for the silent girl who never asked for anything. His daughter Luna, who still sat quietly, always with the same empty gaze. Julia Bennett was 27 years old and had recently gone through one of the hardest moments of her life. She had lost her newborn daughter just a few weeks after birth. The doctors couldn't explain exactly what went wrong, and the days following the loss were filled with confusion, sadness, and silence. Julia lived in a small neighborhood on the outskirts of town. She had no partner, no family nearby, and worked whenever she could to cover her bills. She saw the housekeeping job at the Wakefield mansion in a newspaper ad while sitting in a crowded waiting room. She applied for the position without thinking too much. Part of her just wanted to be somewhere new, far away from the pain that stayed inside her apartment. The mansion was quiet and hidden, with large gates and long driveways. When Julia arrived for the interview, she felt nervous, but focused. She didn't dress fancy, just clean and neat. Richard Wakefield opened the door himself, which surprised her. He looked serious, tired and observant, but not unkind. Richard had interviewed several people for the housekeeping job before. Most had excellent references and professional experience, but something always felt off to him. Either they were too chatty, too cold, or uncomfortable around Luna. When Julia walked in, he noticed her calm posture and quiet eyes. She wasn't trying to impress him, and she didn't speak more than necessary. There was something unusual about her presence. She didn't flinch at the silence in the house. She looked around respectfully, not with curiosity, but with a quiet understanding. During the interview, Richard asked her about her experience, and she answered clearly, though briefly. He noticed the way she spoke, direct and simple, but with a certain softness. At one point she paused and said she had recently lost a child. She didn't give details. Richard nodded, not asking anything else, but that one sentence made him look at her differently. He saw something in her face, a mixture of pain and strength. She wasn't trying to hide either. Julia's first day started early. One of the staff members gave her a short tour of the house and explained the cleaning schedule. Richard was distant but polite. The mansion was large, with many rooms that weren't used often. Julia focused on her work, moving from room to room without making noise. Around midday, she was told she could take a short break in the kitchen. That's when she first saw Luna. The girl sat quietly near a window, holding a small, soft toy. Her head was slightly tilted, and her face looked distant, almost blank. Julia stood at the kitchen door for a moment, watching silently. She had never seen a child so still. There was something about Luna that touched her instantly, not just the fact that she was blind, but the way she seemed disconnected from everything around her. Julia didn't speak. She just sat quietly on the other side of the room and took her break. Even without words, she felt something was different about that child. It wasn't just blindness, it was loneliness. Throughout the next few days, Julia continued her work carefully. She didn't try to force any conversations or ask questions that weren't needed. She cleaned, organized, and followed the instructions given to her. But she began to notice small details about Luna. The girl rarely responded to sounds, but she would sometimes pause and slightly turn her head when Julia entered the room. Once, while dusting the shelves, Julia dropped a cloth. The soft thump made Luna flinch just a little. Julia apologized softly, even though she knew Luna couldn't see her. Over time, Julia realized that Luna responded more to calm, steady movements and soft voices. She also noticed that the staff kept their distance from Luna, doing their best to avoid disturbing her. Julia, however, felt pulled toward the girl in a way she couldn't fully explain. She didn't see Luna as broken or strange. She saw a child who needed more than care. She needed connection. And Julia, carrying the weight of her own loss, began to feel a quiet sense of purpose. One afternoon, while Julia was folding linens in the hallway near Luna's room, she heard a small sound. It was a quiet hum, almost like a whisper. Curious, she paused and listened. It was Luna. She was sitting on the floor, not far from her door, humming a tune that had no clear melody. Julia didn't interrupt. She simply sat nearby, continuing her task. After a few minutes, Luna stopped humming. Then she slowly crawled toward the hallway, her small hands searching for the wall. Julia stood up quietly and offered her hand without saying anything. Luna's hand stopped midair and hovered near Julia's. Then carefully, Luna touched her fingers to Julia's. That moment, though brief, felt incredibly important. Julia didn't speak or cry. She just let Luna hold her hand for a moment. That silent contact told her more than any words. It meant trust, or at least curiosity. From that point on, Julia made sure to pass by Luna more often, not to disturb her, but just to be present. Richard noticed the change, even though Julia didn't say anything. He saw that Luna started moving slightly more during the day. She no longer spent all her time near the window. Sometimes she sat in the hallway or near the kitchen where Julia could be seen working. Richard asked Julia one evening how things were going. She replied honestly, saying that Luna reminded her of someone she lost, but she didn't want to replace anyone. She just wanted to help. Richard didn't respond right away. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. He wasn't someone who trusted easily, but he could tell Julia wasn't pretending. There was no pity in her actions, just quiet attention and genuine care. That night, after Julia had gone to her room, Richard stood outside Luna's door for a while. He watched his daughter sleep and noticed a slight change in her breathing. Deeper, calmer. For the first time in a long while, something had shifted in the house. Julia's arrival hadn't fixed anything, but it had started something new. Julia was dusting the shelves in Luna's room, taking her time and working quietly. She always tried not to disturb the girl, especially when Luna was sitting in her usual corner, holding the same worn-out teddy bear. Julia had learned that Luna preferred silence, or at least calm surroundings. But that day, as she reached behind a wooden chest to clean, she suddenly stopped. She heard something, soft, almost like a whisper. At first, she thought she imagined it. She turned slightly and looked at Luna. The little girl was gently moving her lips, murmuring something while hugging the teddy bear close to her chest. Julia leaned in, just enough to listen. Luna's voice was slow and barely audible, but it was real. She wasn't just making sounds, she was speaking, though the words weren't clear. Julia stayed quiet, not wanting to interrupt. Her eyes focused on Luna's face, and something about her expression caught Julia's attention. There was emotion there. The girl wasn't simply blind and disconnected. There was more happening beneath the surface. Julia slowly backed away and sat on the small armchair near the dresser. From that angle, she could watch Luna without making her nervous. As Luna continued to whisper softly, Julia noticed something strange. Luna's head moved slightly every time there was a sound, a creak on the floor, the shift of a curtain, the distant hum of a vacuum cleaner. Luna reacted to all of it with subtle, accurate movements. Her ears were tuned in with such detail, it felt like she could map out the entire room just by listening. Julia watched in silence, trying not to jump to conclusions, but the girl's reactions seemed almost too sharp for someone who had never seen before. Julia got up slowly and walked across the rug. Luna's head turned in her direction before she even reached the center of the room. The girl didn't speak, but she clearly sensed the movement. Julia placed a toy on the floor and nudged it gently. Luna's body shifted again, this time toward the exact spot where the sound came from. Julia started testing things gently. She opened a small drawer, then closed it slowly. She stepped lightly and then tapped her shoe. Each time Luna reacted, it was small, sometimes just a twitch of the head or a tilt of the chin, but it was always accurate. Julia began to wonder if Luna was using only her hearing, or if there was something else. She decided to try a few toys. Some had sound buttons, others had textures. But one toy she picked up had flashing lights. She turned it on and aimed it toward the wall by accident. Luna didn't respond. That made sense, she thought. Luna was blind after all. But then Julia took out her phone to check the time and accidentally turned on the flashlight. The beam of light crossed in front of Luna's face for just a second. In that moment, Julia thought she saw a movement. Luna's eyelids twitched. Her pupils shifted slightly. It was fast and faint, but it happened. Julia's heart jumped and she stood still, watching closely. Not sure of what she had just seen, Julia turned the flashlight off and waited a moment. Then she turned it on again and gently waved her phone side to side in front of Luna's face. The girl didn't move her head, but her eyes flickered again, as if they were trying to follow something. It wasn't strong or focused, but it was there, some kind of reaction. Julia moved a little closer and repeated the motion. Luna's expression didn't change, but her eyes moved slightly again, following the light's path just for a second. Julia stepped back and sat down, confused and surprised. Could Luna actually see something, even just a small amount of light? She wasn't a doctor, but this didn't feel like the response of someone fully blind. It didn't make sense. The doctors had said Luna was completely blind from birth. Julia thought hard. Maybe it was a reflex. Maybe it was just chance. But she had been around Luna enough to know the difference between chance and reaction, and this felt real. A sudden chill ran through Julia's body. She looked at Luna, who was now sitting quietly again, gently rubbing her fingers over the bear's ear. The girl looked calm and unaware of what had just happened. Julia didn't know what to do. Should she tell Richard right away? Should she wait and try again later to be sure? A lot of thoughts ran through her mind. She didn't want to give anyone false hope. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore what she saw. It wasn't just a feeling, it was movement, reaction, something that hadn't happened before. Julia turned off her flashlight and tucked the phone into her pocket. She sat quietly and just watched Luna for a few more minutes. The little girl started whispering again, holding her bear close, her lips moving slowly. Julia stayed there, still and silent, feeling a strange mix of fear, curiosity, and something else, hope. For the first time, it felt like something new might be possible, something no one had expected. As the room grew quieter, Julia finished cleaning the last corner near Luna's bookshelf. Her mind was still racing, trying to make sense of what she had just seen. She looked at Luna once more before stepping out of the room. The girl was now sitting in the same position, holding the teddy bear and whispering softly to herself. Julia watched her for a moment longer, frozen in thought. She didn't want to assume anything yet, but something had changed that day, something important. Whether it was light, movement, or just a reaction, it was enough to make Julia stop and feel a spark of possibility. She gently closed the door behind her and walked down the hallway, planning her next steps. Maybe she'd try again tomorrow with another light. Maybe she'd talk to Richard carefully without causing alarm. But for now, she kept it to herself. Back in Luna's room, the girl sat still, hugging her bear and whispering words only she could hear, while Julia held on to the moment that had just passed. Julia couldn't get the moment with the flashlight out of her mind. She had seen Luna's eyes move, not once, but twice. The motions were slight, but they were there. It didn't match what she'd been told about Luna's condition. The girl was supposed to be completely blind since birth. That's what the doctors had said. That's what Richard believed. But Julia had seen something different, and now she needed to know more. The next morning, after finishing her usual chores, she returned to Luna's room while the girl sat in her regular spot on the soft rug near the window. Julia acted casually, dusting the nearby shelves, folding a blanket, moving around like any other day. Then, without making a sound, she slowly pushed the window open just a little. A breeze entered the room. Nothing strong, just a light change in the air and brightness. Luna turned her head slightly in that direction, not sharply, but definitely. Julia stood still. That was not a sound. That was not a touch. It was a reaction to light, or something close to it. Later that day, Julia tried another small experiment. She waited until Luna was sitting calmly in the hallway, holding her teddy bear as usual. Julia grabbed her phone again and turned on the flashlight, pretending to be fixing something near a cabinet. Then she slowly moved her hand back and forth between the light and Luna's face, casting clear shadows. She did this several times, making sure not to make any noise or sudden movement. Luna didn't react right away, but after a few seconds, her eyes followed one of the shadows. It was a small movement, almost like a reflex. Julia repeated it carefully, slower this time. Again, Luna's gaze shifted, barely, but it did. Julia's heart started to beat faster. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. There was a connection between Luna's eyes and the light changes. It wasn't focused vision, but it wasn't nothing either. Julia sat down across the hall afterward and wrote down everything she had seen. She wanted to keep track of every test, every reaction. The next few days were filled with more quiet experiments. Julia never talked to anyone about what she was doing. She didn't want to alarm Richard or make him think she was crossing boundaries. But deep down, she believed something wasn't right. She continued to test Luna's responses carefully, slow flashes of light, quick movements, changes in brightness, and Luna kept reacting, just a little each time. These reactions weren't strong or consistent, but they kept happening. That was enough to convince Julia she wasn't imagining it. One afternoon, while tidying up the bathroom cabinets, Julia noticed a wooden box placed behind some towels. Curious, she pulled it out. Inside were several small bottles of eye drops. The labels were partially peeled off, but she could read the name of the doctor, an older name, no longer familiar to her. Each bottle had dates going back several years. There were no clear instructions, no reason listed, only the dosage. They had clearly been used for a long time, maybe daily. Julia checked the dates again. Something didn't feel right. She took one of the bottles and looked at it closely. It didn't look like the usual allergy or dryness drops she had seen before. There were scientific terms she didn't recognize. She searched the name of the medicine discreetly on her phone when no one was around, and what she found made her stomach turn. The compound was used in treatments that reduced eye pressure, but had also been reported in rare cases to affect pupil response and even light sensitivity if used long-term, especially in children. There was no information about why Luna had been using them, or if she even needed them. Julia started to wonder if someone had made a mistake, or worse, if Luna had been misdiagnosed. Could the drops have been blocking some of her natural vision all this time? Julia couldn't answer that yet, but she knew one thing for sure. This wasn't normal. She put the bottles back exactly where she found them and made a note of everything she saw. Her concern was growing, and so were her questions. That night, Julia lay in bed thinking about what to do. She didn't want to accuse anyone of anything. Maybe there was a real medical reason for the eye drops. Maybe the doctor had a plan. But if Luna could actually see light or shadows, even slightly, someone needed to know. Julia thought about telling Richard, but she hesitated. He was careful and protective. He trusted the past doctors and believed in Luna's diagnosis. Bringing this up without proof could cause tension. Still, keeping it a secret didn't feel right either. Luna deserved to be understood. She deserved a real chance. Julia felt more responsible for her now, more connected to her progress and her truth. She decided she would continue her observations for a few more days, keeping detailed notes. Then she would decide how to approach Richard. But in her heart, she already knew something had been missed. Something important. Luna's reactions weren't random. They were clues, and Julia had to keep following them no matter how complicated things became. In the following days, Julia continued to behave normally around Richard and the staff, but her attention stayed focused on Luna. She carefully watched every moment the girl reacted to light or movement. She repeated her quiet tests, changing only one thing at a time, just like she'd read in an article about behavioral observations. Every time Luna showed even a slight response, Julia wrote it down. She tested different times of day, different rooms, and various light sources. And almost every time Luna responded, barely, but clearly. Julia also kept watching the cabinet where the eye drops were stored. Every morning, one of the older staff members brought them to Luna's room and gave her the drops without much explanation. Julia made note of the routine. Luna didn't fight it. She was used to it. But Julia couldn't ignore the growing suspicion. If these drops were part of the problem, they needed to be questioned. She still didn't know how to bring it up to Richard, but the idea that something had been hiding in plain sight all along was now impossible to ignore. A silent alarm had been triggered. Julia had waited long enough. After days of silent tests and notes, and after observing Luna react to different types of light and movement, she felt ready for one final step. The quiet doubt that had started as a passing thought had now grown into something bigger, an undeniable need to know the truth. She waited until the house was calm and still. The staff had finished their duties, and Richard had gone into his office for the evening. Julia found Luna sitting cross-legged on the rug in her room, gently rocking her teddy bear. The girl seemed relaxed, her usual blank expression resting on her face. Julia sat across from her and gently pulled a small flashlight from her pocket. She looked at Luna carefully, making sure she didn't startle her. "Luna," she said softly, "I'm going to shine a little light. Tell me if you feel anything, okay?" Luna didn't answer, but she stayed still. Slowly, gently, Julia raised the flashlight and pointed it straight into Luna's eyes, her heart pounding with fear and hope at the same time. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Luna's eyes stayed open, motionless, and Julia thought maybe this had been a mistake. But then, out of nowhere, Luna blinked. It was slow, almost like she was confused by something. Then she blinked again, this time faster, as if reacting to the brightness. Julia felt her breath catch in her throat. She kept the light steady and leaned forward slightly. "Luna, can you feel that?" she whispered. The room was completely silent except for the sound of their breathing. Luna tilted her head, her eyebrows tightening just a little. Then in the smallest, most fragile voice, she said something Julia wasn't ready for. "I think I saw a light, Mommy." The words were broken and shaky, like she wasn't sure she was saying them right. Julia froze. She couldn't believe what she'd just heard. It wasn't just that Luna might be able to see something. It was the word Mommy. Luna had never called anyone that before, not even once. Julia's eyes filled with tears immediately. That single word broke something open inside Julia. All the weight she had been carrying since the loss of her own baby came rushing back at once, but now mixed with something new, purpose. Luna had reached out in the only way she knew how. It wasn't just a test anymore. It wasn't just light or shadows. It was a connection. Luna had responded not only to what she saw, but to what she felt in that moment. Julia didn't know if Luna had confused her with her real mother, or if the word had simply come out by accident. But it didn't matter. Julia leaned forward and gently placed her hand on Luna's shoulder. "I'm here," she said, her voice trembling. "You're safe." Luna didn't pull away. She stayed still, then slowly leaned forward until her head rested lightly against Julia's chest. It was a small gesture, but for Julia, it meant everything. It wasn't just a test that had worked. It was the beginning of something completely new, something powerful, something real. Julia stayed like that for several minutes, holding Luna without saying anything else. She didn't want to break the moment. The little girl who had been silent, still, and unresponsive for so long had just spoken, softly, uncertainly, but clearly. And it wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. There was emotion in her voice, a kind of confusion mixed with hope, like she was reaching for something she didn't fully understand. Julia could feel her own heartbeat speeding up as her arms gently wrapped around Luna. In her mind, 100 questions started racing. What did this mean? How much could Luna actually see? How long had she been feeling these things but not expressing them? And what about the eye drops? Julia didn't have all the answers, but she had something even stronger: a decision. From that moment forward, she knew her role wasn't just cleaning and taking care of the house. It was protecting Luna, no matter what. Whatever was going on in this house, she couldn't ignore it anymore. When Luna finally pulled away, she looked calmer, even if her face still held that faraway look. Julia wiped her own eyes and smiled gently. "You're very brave," she whispered. Luna didn't say anything else, but she seemed more aware, more present than before. Julia carefully turned off the flashlight and slid it back into her pocket. Her hands were still shaking. She knew this wasn't something she could explain easily to Richard, not without him asking a lot of questions. But she also knew something important had just happened, something that couldn't be ignored or forgotten. Julia had come to this house hoping for work, trying to escape her own grief. But now she had found a new purpose, a reason to stay. Luna wasn't just a quiet child with a medical condition. She was a girl trying to connect, trying to understand a world she hadn't fully experienced yet. Julia realized that from this point forward, her job would be much more than just housework. She had to protect that connection. She had to protect Luna. As Julia stood up, she gently kissed the top of Luna's head and helped her lie down for rest. The girl held her teddy bear close again, but stayed quiet. Julia pulled the blanket over her and sat by her side for a few minutes, just watching. Her mind was filled with thoughts, but her heart had already made the choice. Whatever had caused Luna's blindness, and whatever the truth was behind those eye drops or the years of silence, Julia was going to find out. But she would do it carefully, step by step. For now, Luna had spoken, and that meant everything. She had whispered a truth in the form of a sentence so simple and yet so deep. "I think I saw a light, Mommy." That was the moment it all changed. It wasn't just about medicine or diagnosis anymore. It was about trust, safety, and something like love. As Julia turned off the lights and left the room, she carried that sentence in her chest like a promise. She would protect Luna at all costs. Julia was standing in Luna's room, kneeling beside the small rug, holding the flashlight again. She knew she was risking a lot by doing this, but after what had happened, the blinking, the whispered sentence, the word "Mommy," she couldn't just stop. She needed to be sure. So she aimed the light gently toward Luna's eyes, moving it slowly to see if there would be another reaction. Luna blinked again, just like before, and turned her head slightly as if following the brightness. Julia felt her heart race, but before she could speak, a loud voice came from the hallway. "What are you doing?" It was Richard. He stepped into the room quickly, his face red with anger and confusion. "What is that in your hand?" he shouted. Julia froze, trying to explain, but Richard grabbed the flashlight from her and stared at her with disbelief. "Are you experimenting with my daughter?" he asked harshly. Before Julia could defend herself, Luna suddenly stood up and for the first time in her life ran straight toward someone. She ran to Julia. Luna wrapped her arms around Julia's waist and held on tightly. Her small body trembled, and she didn't say anything at first. Richard was completely stunned. He had never seen his daughter move like that, never seen her walk with purpose, let alone run. "Luna," he said, unsure of what was happening. The girl stayed quiet for a moment, still holding Julia. Then with a small, shaking voice, she said the words that would change everything. "I saw a light." Richard blinked, completely confused. "What did you say?" he asked. Luna turned her head slightly toward his voice and repeated it. "I saw a light." Julia stayed silent, letting the moment speak for itself. Richard looked at both of them, overwhelmed. For years he had believed that his daughter was blind without question, but now she was talking, reacting, and reaching for someone. He couldn't ignore it. Slowly, without saying much else, he nodded and spoke in a low voice. "Stop giving her the eye drops, at least for now." Julia simply nodded, her heart pounding with relief. The following days were filled with quiet changes. Julia stopped giving Luna the drops, exactly as Richard allowed. The first day passed without anything noticeable, but by the second, something began to shift. Luna started responding to light more frequently, especially sunlight. Julia opened the curtains during the morning, and Luna turned her head toward the bright window. It wasn't just random movement. She paused and kept her face in that direction for several minutes, almost as if enjoying the light. Richard stood silently at the door that morning, watching with a mixture of doubt and hope. Later that afternoon, Julia sat down with Luna using simple flashcards, just big white cards with black shapes, a circle, a square, a triangle. Slowly, she held each one up. At first, Luna did nothing. But then, after a long pause, she lifted her hand and pointed toward the circle. Julia gasped quietly. Richard, watching from behind, stepped closer. "She saw that," he whispered. Julia nodded. It was small, but it meant something huge. It meant they were finally heading in the right direction. Each day brought something new. The progress was slow but steady. Julia stayed consistent, working patiently with Luna through small games and simple visual tasks. Luna reacted more often now, not only to lights, but to objects. One afternoon, Julia placed 3 toys in front of her, a soft ball, a toy car, and a plastic duck. Without saying anything, she nudged the duck gently, and Luna smiled. Then she pointed at it. Richard was nearby, and for a few seconds he said nothing. He just watched, his eyes full of surprise. "She's choosing," he said quietly. Julia nodded again. "Yes, she's seeing." That night, Luna sat with Julia by the window, and instead of just staring blankly, she began asking small questions. "What color is that?" she asked, pointing toward a blanket. It shocked them both. Julia answered softly, and Luna asked again, about other things. Richard stood near the doorway again, not saying a word. For a man who had lived with hopelessness for years, the sudden spark of progress left him speechless. He began to believe again. One morning, as sunlight filled the hallway, Luna walked toward the brightness without help. She didn't stumble or hesitate. She moved with quiet confidence, stretching her hand out toward the light coming through the window. Julia followed slowly behind her, not interrupting. Richard had been in his office, but came out when he heard footsteps. He stopped when he saw Luna standing near the light, one hand on the glass, the other holding her teddy bear. "She's not afraid anymore," Julia said gently. Richard didn't answer. He sat down nearby, his face pale. "I don't know how we missed it all these years," he finally said. Julia stayed quiet, stayed. There was no easy answer. Maybe it was the wrong diagnosis, maybe it was the medicine, or maybe no one had paid close enough attention. But now, none of that mattered. What mattered was Luna's progress. Her smiles became more frequent. Her eyes started to look toward faces. And sometimes, in quiet moments, she would reach out and touch Julia's face, like she was trying to memorize her features. By the end of the week, the atmosphere in the mansion had changed completely. It was no longer silent and heavy. It felt lighter, more alive. Luna now responded to colors, shapes, even simple gestures. She smiled more. She laughed softly when Julia tickled her or told silly stories. She had stopped whispering to herself as much, and instead began asking questions out loud. Richard, though still distant at times, started sitting with them during these moments. He no longer watched from a distance. He started participating, showing Luna old family photo albums and asking her if she could make anything out. One afternoon, Luna squinted at a picture of her mother and asked, "Who is that lady in the red dress?" Richard cried quietly, not from pain, but from the shock of hearing his daughter notice something visual, something real. Julia sat beside them, quietly holding Luna's hand. The journey wasn't over. There were still questions and doubts, but one thing was certain: Luna was changing. And it all began the day she said, "I saw a light." Luna's improvements had been real. They weren't her imagination, and they didn't happen by chance. Everything had changed the moment they stopped using the eye drops. That couldn't be ignored. She needed answers, real ones. So one evening after Luna had gone to sleep, Julia took one of the small glass bottles from the cabinet where the drops were stored. She placed it in a plastic bag and hid it carefully in her purse. The next morning, while Richard was still in a call, Julia stepped out for a few hours. She drove to a nearby city where she had arranged to meet someone from her past. Her name was Sophia, an old friend from nursing school, who was now doing her residency in ophthalmology. They hadn't spoken in years, but when Julia explained briefly what was going on, Sophia agreed to help. They met at a small diner near the hospital. Julia handed over the bottle, explaining everything that had happened with Luna. Sophia promised to run the tests quickly. A few days later, Julia received a call. It was Sophia, and her voice was tense. "You need to come," she said. Julia drove straight to the hospital, her stomach tight the entire time. When she arrived, Sophia brought her to a quiet office and closed the door. She held the bottle of drops in her hand and pointed to a printed lab report on the table. "These aren't normal eye drops," she began. "There's a compound in here, cyclopentalate, but in extremely high doses. This chemical causes pupil contraction and inhibits light response. In normal doses, it's used to treat certain eye conditions, but this formula is different. It's aggressive. Prolonged use, especially in children, could easily cause temporary vision loss or even convince someone that they're blind." Julia stared at the report, her heart pounding. "You're saying the drops made her blind?" Sophia nodded. "Yes. And if she was never completely blind to begin with, these drops would have erased what little sight she had. Julia felt sick. She covered her mouth and sat down, stunned. Julia asked Sophia if this kind of thing could happen by mistake. Maybe someone had mixed up prescriptions or used an outdated treatment. But Sophia shook her head. No, this isn't a mistake. This formula was intentional. Someone designed it to restrict vision. Julia looked at the report again and froze when she saw the name printed in the corner of the document. Prescribed by Dr. Atticus Morrow. Her eyes widened. That was Luna's doctor. He had treated her since birth. Julia remembered the name from the labels on Luna's old records and medication bottles. She couldn't believe it. How is this even allowed? She asked. Sophia frowned. I've heard of him. A few years ago, there were rumors about malpractice lawsuits filed against him in several states. I thought he had stopped practicing. Julia felt dizzy. If this man had knowingly prescribed medication that made Luna blind, or kept her that way, then something horrible had been done. She thanked Sophia, took the report, and left the hospital. On the way back to the mansion, her hands shook at the steering wheel. That evening, Julia sat down with Richard in his office. She placed the lab report in front of him and waited while he read it. His expression changed slowly, from confusion to disbelief, and then to something darker. When he saw the name Dr. Atticus Morrow in bold print, he stood up abruptly and walked to the window, silent for a long time. This can't be real, he said finally. He treated Luna since she was a newborn. He told me she had no retinal response, that her optic nerve was underdeveloped. He convinced me she would never see anything. Julia stayed calm, explaining everything Sophia had said. The chemical, the purpose, the risks. It all pointed to one conclusion. Luna had not been born completely blind, and the drops had made her condition worse. Richard sat back down, visibly shaken. I trusted him, he muttered. I followed every instruction. Julia reached across the table. You didn't know, but now we do. Richard nodded slowly. Then we have to find him. We have to know why he did this. First to old colleagues, then to medical offices in the state, and finally to the licensing board. Everyone gave him the same kind of answer. Dr. Atticus Morrow hadn't practiced medicine in years. His license had been suspended after a series of lawsuits involving other children. Cases that had never made national news, but were serious enough to push him out of the profession. In each case, the families had reported strange prescriptions, inconsistent diagnoses, and long-term damage. Richard felt sick to his stomach. He realized he had never truly questioned the treatment Luna was receiving. After his wife died, he had simply accepted what the doctor said, trusting his word without thinking deeper. Now he understood that trust had been broken in the worst possible way. Julia continued her own research online, finding a few articles on obscure blogs and forums written by angry parents. One post mentioned Morrow leaving town quietly, avoiding court by settling privately. The more they learned, the clearer it became. He had vanished. Richard and Julia sat in silence that evening, both overwhelmed. Luna was asleep upstairs, unaware of the storm that was now unraveling around her past. Richard held the lab report in one hand and a photo of Luna in the other. He stole years from her, he said quietly. Years she could have been seeing, learning, living. Julia nodded, her voice calm but steady. But she's not lost anymore. She's gaining it back, slowly. Richard looked at her, and for the first time, the hardness in his face seemed to fade. You saved her, he said. Julia shook her head. We still have a long way to go. Richard agreed. He promised they would keep searching for Morrow, even if it took months. They needed closure. They needed justice. But most of all, they needed to rebuild Luna's future on honest ground this time. As the night settled in, both of them felt the weight of what had been uncovered. The truth had finally come to light, and from this point forward, there was no turning back. Richard and Julia agreed it was time to speak out. The truth about Dr. Morrow couldn't stay hidden. Richard contacted a journalist he had trusted in the past, someone known for careful, respectful reporting. Together, they started organizing medical records, test results, and all the documents proving Luna had been given dangerous medication for years. Julia also wrote a statement about her discovery and involvement. They didn't want fame or drama. They just wanted the truth exposed so that no other child would suffer the same. But soon after the story was shared with the journalist, strange things started happening. The following day, a new article appeared online. Not about Morrow, but about Richard. The headline suggested he had ignored professional advice for Luna's treatment for years and had refused important therapies. It painted him as a careless father. Richard was shocked. None of it was true. Julia tried to contact the journalist, but they said the piece didn't come from them. Someone had leaked false information to discredit Richard before the real story came out. As they tried to control the situation, things got worse. Julia began receiving strange messages on her phone from an unknown number. At first they were vague, saying things like, "You should stop, and it's not your business." But then they became more direct. "Stay out of this, or we'll make sure you regret it." Julia told Richard immediately. He wanted to call the police, but Julia wasn't sure if that would help. There was no name, no face behind the threats. They both realized that someone didn't want the truth about Dr. Morrow going public. Maybe it was the doctor himself, maybe someone connected to him. Either way, they couldn't back down. Richard's legal team began investigating the source of the false news articles. They contacted web hosts and traced IP addresses, but everything led to private servers or untraceable sources. The situation was stressful, but it made one thing very clear. Someone was scared of what they were about to reveal. That fear meant the truth was even more important than they thought. Despite the chaos happening outside, something amazing was happening inside the mansion. Luna had been taken for a full vision reassessment by a trusted specialist. The results confirmed what Julia and Richard already suspected. Luna had partial functional vision. Her sight wasn't perfect, and it would likely never be completely normal. But she could detect light, identify shapes, and react to movement. The specialist explained that with regular visual stimulation sessions, Luna could improve her ability to process what she saw. Julia and Richard set up daily activities to help with that. They used colorful toys, movement-based games, and spent time in sunlit rooms. Luna responded well. She didn't seem scared or confused, just curious. She pointed to colors when asked, followed moving objects with her eyes, and even started recognizing differences between day and night. These small changes filled the house with new energy. The staff, once silent and reserved, now smiled more often. There was a sense of hope again. Luna was proving everyone wrong. She was learning to see, little by little. One afternoon, Julia placed a set of crayons and paper in front of Luna. She didn't explain much, just told her that these were colors and she could do anything she wanted with them. Luna touched each crayon, feeling their shape. Then she picked the yellow one and pressed it to the paper, unsure at first. The line she drew was shaky, uneven, but it was her first. Julia watched closely. Luna kept drawing, slow, scattered lines across the page. When she finished, she smiled and held up the paper. "Is it good?" she asked. Julia hugged her tightly. It wasn't about the drawing. It was about what it meant. This was a girl who, just weeks ago, hadn't spoken much and barely reacted to anything. Now she was expressing herself in a new way. Richard walked in and saw the drawing. He didn't speak at first. He knelt down beside her and said, "It's beautiful." Luna smiled again and started drawing another one. It became a new daily routine, drawing, exploring colors, and slowly understanding the world around her. Outside the mansion, the pressure continued. More articles were posted online. accusing Richard of being careless with past business decisions. One even claimed Julia had faked Luna's progress to gain attention. They knew none of it was real, but that didn't stop people from reading it. Social media accounts connected to Morrow's past clinics stayed silent, not confirming or denying anything. The smear campaign had clearly been planned, and now Richard's team believed they knew why. Someone feared a lawsuit or public exposure. Even with the lies spreading, Richard and Julia refused to give in. They continued moving forward with their story, sharing verified documents with legal teams and medical boards. Julia also met with 2 other families who had suspicions about Morrow's past treatments. Their children had experienced similar issues. That information gave Julia more confidence that they weren't alone. They had uncovered something bigger than Luna's case. It was a pattern, and it had to be stopped. But they also agreed not to rush. Luna's well-being came first, and they would protect her no matter what. Despite everything trying to stop them, Luna's world was growing. She began naming colors on her own: red, blue, green. Her favorite was yellow. She said it made her feel happy. Julia continued reading to her, pointing at pictures and helping her trace shapes with her fingers. Richard joined them every night, and the 3 of them formed a quiet routine that brought calm in the middle of the storm. The mansion didn't feel as lonely anymore. There were still challenges to face, threats, lies, and legal risks, but they didn't seem as heavy with Luna laughing and showing her drawings proudly. Her progress gave them strength. On one of her drawings, she wrote her name for the first time with help. Julia taped it to the kitchen wall. "This is just the beginning," she said. Richard agreed. They still had a long road ahead, but they weren't afraid of it anymore. The attacks would come and go, but the truth they had uncovered couldn't be erased. And Luna, once thought to be lost in darkness, was finally seeing her future. With all the lab reports, testimonies, and documents collected, Richard and Julia decided it was finally time to take formal action. They scheduled a meeting with the district attorney's office. Richard didn't use his connections or lawyers. He walked in like any other citizen. Julia came with him, carrying a folder with all the printed reports, including the toxicology results, prescription history, and the testimonies from the other families who had experienced similar situations. They were received by a young but serious prosecutor who listened carefully as they explained what had happened to Luna. When the name Dr. Atticus Morrow came up, the prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "You're not the first to bring him up," he said. That single sentence gave Richard and Julia hope. Over the next few weeks, the district attorney's office began its investigation. Phone calls were made, records were pulled, and subpoenas were issued. Then, something shocking was discovered. Dr. Morrow had signed private contracts with pharmaceutical companies. These deals gave him access to experimental compounds, many of which had never passed proper clinical trials. The files revealed that Dr. Morrow had used his position as a pediatric specialist to conduct unofficial trials on children, prescribing eye treatments that weren't yet approved. In return, he received financial bonuses, trips, and under-the-table compensation from the companies funding the studies. Some of the contracts were encrypted, but investigators were able to match product codes from the pharmaceutical companies to the ingredients found in Luna's eye drops. It was all there. Dates, names, transactions, even signatures. Richard was furious. Julia was sickened. They had suspected something bad, but not this level of deception. When this evidence was brought to light, the district attorney approved the opening of a formal criminal case. Soon after, the media picked up the story. At first, it started on local news, child's vision blocked by illegal drug trials. But then, national outlets followed. Interviews were requested, headlines spread, and with the story gaining attention, more families began to come forward. Parents who had seen unexplained changes in their children's vision started to ask questions. The truth had finally come out. The public reaction was intense. Online forums were filled with parents sharing similar stories. Some described how their children were prescribed the same drops by Morrow and had shown no improvement or even worsened symptoms. A few families said they had tried to report him in the past, but were ignored or pressured into silence. Now, with national eyes on the case, silence was no longer an option. Julia became an unexpected spokesperson. Reporters asked for interviews, and though she was nervous at first, she agreed to speak. She didn't want fame, she just wanted to tell the truth. She talked about how she met Luna, what she had observed, and how small details led her to question everything. Her calm, honest way of speaking touched people. Viewers saw her not just as a caregiver, but as someone who had done what no one else dared. Her face was shown on screens across the country with headlines like "Nanny Who Uncovered the Truth" and "Julia Bennett, a voice for the voiceless." Her life had completely changed. Richard also received attention, but he avoided the spotlight as much as possible. He did attend court hearings and gave statements to the investigators, but he didn't want to become the center of the story. For him, it was about Luna, and about all the children who had been hurt. His guilt ran deep. For years, he had trusted Morrow without question. He had believed his daughter's blindness was unchangeable, but now, each day he spent with Luna reminded him how much had been stolen from her. Still, something had changed in him. He wasn't just a grieving father anymore. He was active, alert, and involved. He made sure Luna got the best visual therapy available. He followed every update in the case, and in quiet moments, he spoke to Julia not just as a caretaker, but as someone he admired deeply. She had done what he couldn't. He respected her strength and her persistence. Slowly, without planning it, a bond began to grow between them. It wasn't romantic at first, but it was steady. It was real. At home, Luna continued making progress. Her vision wasn't perfect, but she was learning fast. She could now recognize simple objects, match colors, and follow movements in bright rooms. She was more talkative, asking questions about things she hadn't been able to experience before. "Is that the color blue?" she'd ask, pointing at the sky. "Or what's that shape?" While touching the edge of a book, Julia and Richard answered every question with care. They created a structured routine that included games, drawing, visual exercises, and quiet reading time. The atmosphere in the mansion was completely different from what it had been months ago. There was laughter now, and movement, and a sense of purpose. Staff members were more relaxed. The house didn't feel like a museum anymore. It felt like a home. On several occasions, Julia found herself smiling at Richard during dinner, and he'd smile back, saying nothing but understanding everything. It wasn't just about Luna anymore. Their shared fight for her had created something deeper between them, something that didn't need to be explained yet. By the time the case officially went to trial, public support was strong. Dozens of families testified. The pharmaceutical companies denied involvement at first, but evidence made it impossible to hide. Dr. Morrow, finally located in another state under a false identity, was arrested and brought to court. His trial became a symbol of the importance of medical ethics. Julia testified calmly, clearly, explaining her discoveries and actions step by step. Richard also testified, admitting his blind trust and failure to question Morrow sooner. The court respected their honesty. Luna didn't appear in court, but her drawings were submitted as part of the evidence. Proof of progress. When the guilty verdict was announced, it felt like justice had finally arrived. The crowd outside the courthouse clapped. Julia and Richard didn't celebrate publicly. They drove home in silence, but with a quiet peace inside them. That night, Luna showed Julia a drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands. "It's us," she said. Julia smiled. The road had been hard, but they had made it together, and they were just getting started. Dr. Atticus Morrow was officially convicted. The court found him guilty of illegal medical practices, including using unapproved medications on children without proper consent. He was sentenced to prison, and the companies involved were fined and banned from producing similar compounds. News of the conviction spread across the country. The case had brought awareness to thousands of families, and changes were made to how medical trials were approved and monitored. But for Richard, Julia, and Luna, the most important part was that it was finally over. The chapter of fear and silence had ended. They could now focus entirely on healing. Richard took a step back from his business and spent more time at home. Julia remained fully present, continuing to guide Luna with patience and love. And Luna, who once sat in silence holding a teddy bear, was now moving forward. With the help of a child development specialist, she was officially enrolled in a regular elementary school with a custom learning plan. It was the start of a new life, one full of movement, people, and bright colors. The first days at school were a mix of excitement and nervousness. Luna had never been in a classroom before. Julia went with her to meet the teacher, who had already read her file and knew about her vision progress. They introduced Luna to the class, slowly, giving her time to adjust. At first, she stayed quiet and stayed close to Julia, unsure of the noise and constant motion around her. But within a few days, things began to change. She started answering questions, raising her hand and joining group activities. She was fascinated by things other kids had taken for granted, like colors on the board, pictures in books, and even the way chalk left marks on the blackboard. Julia would pick her up every afternoon, and Luna would talk non-stop on the way home. "Did you know blue and green are my favorite together?" she said once. Her words came faster, her eyes brighter. Richard listened with pride each evening. The little girl he once feared might never engage with the world was now fully part of it. Months passed quickly. Luna made new friends and continued improving in every subject, especially art. Her teachers said she had a unique way of understanding shapes and colors. Julia often found sketches stuffed into her backpack, houses, animals, faces, sometimes just abstract color swirls. Every picture told a story. At home, Richard turned one of the rooms into a mini studio just for her. It had shelves full of paints, pencils, and paper. Luna spent hours there after school. She liked working with music on, usually something soft in the background. Julia sat nearby, sometimes helping with supplies, but mostly just watching. Luna didn't need direction anymore. She had found her rhythm. Then, one day, an official letter arrived. It was from a National Children's Foundation. Luna had been selected to receive a special medal, an honor given to children who had shown strength in difficult situations. Along with the medal, she would be named an ambassador for resilient childhood, encouraging other kids to keep going no matter what. The ceremony would happen at a large event in the city. The day of the ceremony arrived. Julia helped Luna into a soft yellow dress, her favorite color. Richard wore a dark suit but had a flower pin in the same shade as Luna's dress. They arrived early and were guided backstage. Other children were also receiving honors, but Luna's name was last on the list. The host of the event gave a warm speech about children overcoming hard beginnings. When Luna's name was called, she walked calmly across the stage, holding Julia's hand. The applause was loud and full of love. A volunteer placed the medal gently around her neck. Then something unexpected happened. The host turned to the audience and said they had one more recognition to give. To the woman who stood by her when no one else did, who believed in light when everything seemed dark. Today we recognize Julia Bennett as Luna's adoptive mother and lifelong guardian. Julia froze for a moment, surprised. Then she stepped forward, tears in her eyes. Luna hugged her tightly. The crowd stood and applauded again. It was a moment they would never forget. Years passed. Luna grew into a confident teenager with a clear purpose. She kept drawing, painting, and learning more about art every day. Her teachers described her as focused, kind, and talented. She used her story as motivation and often spoke to other children going through difficult times. By the time she turned 18, Luna had been accepted to an art academy. She moved into a small apartment in the city, but Julia and Richard remained close. They visited often and helped her set up a real studio. Luna began working on a series of paintings inspired by her childhood. She wanted to show her journey, not just the pain, but the discovery and joy too. A few years later, she held her first public art exhibition in a local gallery. It featured 15 paintings, each one named after a moment that changed her life. Friends, teachers, and even the journalist who once told her story came to see. The gallery was packed. Luna stood in front of a microphone and prepared to give a short speech. She looked out at the audience, took a breath, and began speaking. Her voice was calm and steady. She thanked her teachers, friends, and supporters. Then she paused and looked at Julia, who stood beside Richard near the front row. "People often ask me when I saw light for the first time," Luna said. "They expect me to talk about flashlights or sunlight or my first drawing. But the truth is, the first light I ever saw didn't come from my eyes. It came from her heart." She pointed to Julia. The room went completely silent for a few seconds. Julia covered her mouth, moved to tears. The crowd slowly began to clap, some already crying. Richard placed his arm around Julia's shoulder. That night, the gallery stayed full until closing. Luna's art sold quickly, but more than the colors or strokes, people came for the story behind it. A story of truth, love, and second chances. And in the center of it all was Luna, no longer just the silent girl, but the artist who had learned to see. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.
Millionaire woman catches janitor dancing with his daughter in a wheelchair. What happened shocked everyone. Before we begin, just know, no matter where you are in the world, I'm glad you're here. The rain hammered mercilessly against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor as Victoria Sterling stood motionless in her corner office, watching the city blur beneath threatening storm clouds. At 29, she commanded a real estate empire worth $300 million, built methodically from absolutely nothing after her parents died in a devastating car crash when she was just 18 years old. Cold, calculated, and utterly alone. That's exactly how Fortune magazine had described her just last month in their cover story about America's most ruthless young entrepreneurs. Ms. Sterling? Her assistant's voice crackled nervously through the polished chrome intercom system. The new night janitor is here for his orientation meeting. Victoria barely glanced up from her meticulously organized acquisition reports, her manicured fingers drumming impatiently against the mahogany desk that had cost more than most people's annual salaries. "Handle it yourself, Janet. I don't have time for mundane staff introductions. Send him to human resources." But something indefinable made her pause and look down at the sprawling marble lobby, 42 floors below. Through the impressive glass ceiling, she could clearly see a man in his early 30s methodically pushing a yellow cleaning cart, while a little girl in a bright sunshine yellow dress skipped energetically beside him. Even from this dizzying height, she could observe the child's animated gestures, her obvious unbridled excitement at being inside such a magnificent, imposing building. Victoria's chest tightened unexpectedly, like someone had wrapped steel bands around her ribs. She hadn't witnessed a father and daughter together since. She forcefully pushed the painful memory away before it could surface completely. "Actually, Janet," she said, her voice remaining steady despite the strange, uncomfortable flutter developing in her stomach. "I'll handle the orientation meeting myself. Send him to conference room A." 25 minutes later, Victoria stepped confidently off the polished brass elevator into the gleaming marble lobby, her designer heels clicking with military precision. The janitor, Marcus Thompson according to his employment file, was patiently explaining the building's complex layout to his daughter, while she spun in delighted circles, her lightweight wheelchair temporarily forgotten by the imposing security desk. "Daddy, it's exactly like a fairy tale castle," the little girl exclaimed enthusiastically, her melodious voice echoing beautifully off the cathedral-like vaulted ceiling. Victoria approached them purposefully, her heels announcing her presence with authority. Mr. Thompson, I'm Victoria Sterling, the building owner. She extended a perfectly manicured hand, immediately noticing how his calloused, weathered palm told unmistakable stories of years of honest, backbreaking work. I understand you'll be working our night maintenance shift. Marcus straightened respectfully, his striking green eyes meeting hers directly without flinching. Yes, ma'am. Thank you sincerely for this incredible opportunity. I promise you won't regret your decision to hire me. This beautiful angel is my daughter Emma, he continued warmly, gently guiding the 6-year-old forward with obvious paternal pride. She'll be accompanying me until I can arrange proper childcare arrangements. Victoria's sharp business instincts activated immediately like a computer program. Mr. Thompson, this is a professional corporate environment, not a community daycare center. Emma's brilliant, innocent smile faltered noticeably, and she instinctively moved closer to her father's protective presence. Victoria felt an unexpected sharp pang of guilt pierce through her carefully constructed emotional armor at witnessing the child's wounded reaction. I understand your concerns completely, Marcus replied, his voice remaining respectful, but carrying unmistakable firmness. It's absolutely temporary, just until our new nanny starts work next Monday morning. Emma won't interfere with my work performance in any way. I personally guarantee it. Victoria studied them both intently, her analytical mind cataloging details. The man's unwavering dedication was evident in every weathered line of his honest face, and something profound about the way Emma gazed at her father with such absolute, unquestioning trust stirred long-buried memories she'd fought desperately to forget. Her own beloved father used to look at her with that exact same expression of pure love, before the tragic accident stole away the only family she'd ever truly known. 1 week, she heard herself saying, the words escaping before her logical mind could intervene. But if there are any disruptions whatsoever, there absolutely won't be, Marcus assured her with quiet confidence. Thank you so much, Ms. Sterling. Your kindness means everything. As Victoria walked purposefully away, her mind reeling, she couldn't shake the persistent image of Emma's bright, trusting eyes or the gentle, loving way Marcus had spoken to his precious daughter. She told herself firmly it was simple business pragmatism. Experienced, reliable janitors were genuinely hard to find in Manhattan, but deep down in her carefully guarded heart, she knew it was something else entirely, something that would fundamentally change everything about her perfectly ordered, emotionally sterile life. 3 exhausting days later, Victoria found herself staying late at the office again, completely buried in complex contracts for her newest ambitious acquisition, a struggling hotel chain she planned to transform into luxury condominiums. The imposing building was eerily quiet except for the distant, rhythmic hum of Marcus's industrial cleaning equipment working somewhere on the lower floors. She was meticulously reviewing detailed financial projections when she heard it. Soft, melodic music drifting mysteriously up from the lobby like a gentle siren song. Curious despite her typically rigid self-discipline, Victoria made her way to the executive balcony overlooking the expansive main floor. What she witnessed made her breath catch painfully in her throat. Marcus had carefully moved the heavy lobby furniture aside, creating an open, inviting space on the polished marble floor that gleamed under the soft evening lighting. Emma sat in her compact wheelchair. When exactly had she needed that mobility aid? Clapping enthusiastically along as her devoted father performed silly, exaggerated dance moves that made her giggle uncontrollably with pure, infectious joy. Your turn, Princess Emma, Marcus called out playfully, spinning dramatically with theatrical flair. I can't dance anymore, Daddy, Emma said wistfully, but her radiant smile never wavered. My legs don't work right anymore since the treatment started. Victoria gripped the cold marble railing tighter, her knuckles turning white. Any more? What terrible thing had happened to this innocent, beautiful child? Dancing isn't just about legs, sweetheart, Marcus said tenderly, kneeling beside the wheelchair with infinite patience. Dancing is about feeling the music deep in your heart, letting it move your soul. He stood protectively behind Emma's chair and gently pushed it forward and back to the rhythm of the soft jazz melody playing from his worn smartphone. Emma squealed with absolute delight, throwing her thin arms wide as they swayed together in perfect harmony. See? You're the most beautiful dancer I know, Marcus said lovingly, spinning the wheelchair in a careful, gentle circle. Victoria watched, completely transfixed, as this devoted father effortlessly created pure magic from an ordinary Tuesday evening. Emma's musical laughter filled the vast, usually cold lobby, echoing joyfully off marble walls that had never before heard such pure, unfiltered happiness. "Now watch this special move, princess," Marcus announced, attempting what appeared to be an amusing cross between a formal waltz and comical robot dancing. Emma dissolved into helpless giggles, covering her face with her small hands. "Daddy, you're so wonderfully silly. Silly is definitely my middle name. Marcus Silly Thompson, at your royal service." He bowed dramatically with exaggerated formality, making Emma clap with uninhibited delight. Victoria felt something fundamental crack deep inside her chest. A massive emotional wall she'd built brick by careful brick over 11 long years of self-imposed isolation. She suddenly remembered her own loving father teaching her to dance in their modest apartment, her small feet standing on his large ones while he hummed old Frank Sinatra melodies. Before she realized what she was doing, Victoria was walking determinedly toward the elevator. She told herself sternly she was just checking on building security protocols, ensuring no important company policies were being violated. But as the elevator descended smoothly, carrying her toward the beautiful sound of Emma's laughter and Marcus's gentle, caring voice, Victoria knew she was lying completely to herself. She was irresistibly drawn to something she thought she'd lost forever, the precious possibility of family, of genuine human connection, of feeling something deeper than the cold satisfaction of another profitable quarter. As the polished elevator doors opened silently, Marcus looked up, genuinely surprised. "Ms. Sterling, I sincerely hope we weren't too loud." "No," Victoria said quietly, stepping into the welcoming lobby. "You weren't too loud at all." Emma waved enthusiastically from her wheelchair. "Hi, pretty lady. Do you want to dance with us? It's super fun." Victoria looked into those innocent, sparkling eyes and felt the last of her carefully constructed defenses crumble completely. I don't really dance," Victoria admitted, her voice softer and more vulnerable than either Marcus or Emma had ever heard it. Emma's adorable face scrunched up in complete disbelief. "Everyone can dance. That's what Daddy always says. Right, Daddy?" Marcus studied Victoria's carefully composed face, seeing something genuinely vulnerable beneath her polished corporate exterior. "Emma's absolutely right. Would you like to try with us?" Victoria hesitated nervously, glancing self-consciously at her expensive designer suit, her perfectly styled hair that had cost $300 that morning. Everything about her appearance screamed corporate precision and control, but Emma's expectant, hopeful smile was absolutely impossible to resist. "I suppose, just for a moment." Marcus extended his work-worn hand with surprising grace. "May I have this dance, Ms. Sterling?" Victoria's fingers trembled slightly as she took his strong hand. His touch was warm and calloused from honest labor, so completely different from the soft, pampered handshakes of boardroom executives she dealt with daily. "Call me Victoria," she whispered almost inaudibly. The gentle music shifted to something slower, more romantic. Marcus led her in a simple, comfortable sway, nothing fancy or complicated, just natural movement to the rhythm. Victoria felt awkward and self-conscious at first, hyper-aware of Emma watching them with obvious delight, but gradually she began to genuinely relax. "You're doing great," Marcus said softly, his voice warm with encouragement. "Just let the music guide you. Don't overthink it." "Spin her, Daddy," Emma called out excitedly from her wheelchair. "Like you do with me during our special dances." Marcus caught Victoria's eye, silently asking permission with raised eyebrows. She nodded hesitantly, and he twirled her carefully, his strong hands gentle and sure. For just one magical moment, Victoria Sterling, CEO, Millionaire, the infamous ice queen of Manhattan real estate, felt like a regular woman dancing with a genuinely kind man, while a delighted little girl cheered them on enthusiastically. "My turn, my turn." Emma clapped her hands together. Victoria surprised herself completely by kneeling gracefully beside the wheelchair. "Would you teach me how to dance sitting down? I've never learned that." Emma's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? It's super fun. You have to move your arms like this," she demonstrated beautifully, swaying her upper body and moving her arms in graceful, fluid waves. Victoria mimicked the movements, feeling ridiculous but oddly free and uninhibited. When had she last done anything without carefully calculating the return on investment? "You're a natural," Marcus said, genuine warmth filling his voice as he watched them together. "Where did Emma learn to dance so beautifully?" Victoria asked, genuinely curious. The bright light dimmed slightly in Marcus's green eyes. Before she got sick, Emma took ballet classes at Miss Catherine's dance academy. She was going to be a professional ballerina when she grew up. I still am, Emma insisted with fierce determination. Ballerinas can use wheels too, can't they, Victoria? Victoria looked at this incredibly brave little girl who absolutely refused to let anything dim her brilliant dreams, and felt something fundamental shift inside her heart. Absolutely. The most beautiful ballerinas are the ones who dance with their whole heart no matter what challenges they face. Marcus's grateful, warm smile nearly undid her emotional composure completely. Ms. Sterling, Victoria, he corrected himself gently. Thank you so much for this magical moment, for letting us. Thank you, Victoria interrupted softly, for reminding me that there are far more important things than quarterly reports and profit margins. As the gentle music faded, Emma yawned widely. Daddy, I'm getting sleepy. Time to go home, Princess. Marcus began gathering their belongings with practiced efficiency. Victoria watched them prepare to leave, feeling an unexpected, overwhelming emptiness at the thought of returning to her silent office, her empty penthouse apartment with its cold, expensive furniture. Same time tomorrow? The words slipped out before she could stop them. Marcus looked genuinely surprised. You want to dance again? Victoria lifted her chin, channeling her familiar boardroom confidence. I might need a few more lessons, that is, if it's not too much trouble for you both. Emma bounced excitedly in her wheelchair. Yes, we can teach you the spinning move and the twirling move. As they waited for Marcus to call a taxi, Victoria found herself asking, Emma, what happened? If you don't mind me asking about your condition. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly, his protective instincts evident. Leukemia. She's been fighting it courageously for 8 months now. Victoria's blood turned to ice water. This beautiful, vibrant child is she? We're very hopeful, Marcus said firmly, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. The treatments are expensive, but we're managing somehow. Emma's a fighter, the strongest person I know. As their taxi pulled away into the night, Victoria remained standing alone in the empty lobby, Emma's musical laughter still echoing in her mind. She thought about the millions sitting uselessly in her various accounts, the immense power she wielded, the influential connections she'd built over years of ruthless networking. And for the first time in years, she wondered if any of it mattered at all. Victoria couldn't concentrate on anything the next day. Every few minutes, she found herself glancing obsessively at the antique clock on her desk, calculating exactly how many hours remained until Marcus and Emma would arrive for the evening. She'd rescheduled 2 critically important meetings and declined a dinner invitation from the city's planning commissioner, something the old Victoria would never have considered doing. At exactly 6 p.m., she was waiting anxiously in the lobby. Victoria! Emma's delighted squeal echoed through the marble space as Marcus pushed her wheelchair through the revolving entrance doors. Are you ready for your advanced dancing lesson? We practiced new moves. I've been looking forward to it all day, Victoria admitted, surprising herself with her complete honesty. Marcus smiled warmly, but she noticed the tired lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders sagged slightly under some invisible weight. Long day? She asked gently. Emma had a chemotherapy treatment this morning, he said quietly, trying to keep his voice light. But she insisted she felt well enough to come tonight. Nothing keeps this one down for long. Victoria knelt beside Emma's wheelchair, noticing for the first time how thin the little girl had become beneath her bright, cheerful sweater. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but her smile remained radiant. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Great. The medicine makes me a little tired and queasy, but dancing makes everything better. Emma's smile was brilliant despite her obvious fatigue. Daddy says dancing is like medicine for the heart and soul. Your daddy is a very smart man, Victoria said, meeting Marcus's grateful gaze over Emma's head. They danced for a full hour, gentle movements that carefully accommodated Emma's fluctuating energy level. Victoria found herself laughing more than she had in years, spinning Emma's wheelchair in careful circles, while Marcus provided silly commentary that had them all giggling helplessly. Victoria, Emma said during a break, do you have a family? The innocent question hit like a physical blow to her chest. Victoria's smile faltered completely. No, sweetheart. It's just me. That must be really lonely, Emma said with the startling wisdom that only children possess. Would you like to share ours? Daddy says families don't have to be the same blood to love each other completely. Victoria's throat tightened painfully. That's very generous of you, Emma. Marcus cleared his throat uncomfortably. Emma, we should let Victoria get home. It's getting late for school tomorrow. But Victoria didn't want them to go. The thought of returning to her sterile penthouse, of eating another solitary dinner while reviewing contracts, felt absolutely unbearable. Actually, she heard herself saying, I was wondering, would you both like to have dinner with me tomorrow night? Somewhere really nice, my treat, of course. Emma clapped her hands together excitedly. Really? Like a real fancy restaurant? Marcus hesitated, his pride warring with practicality. Victoria, that's incredibly kind, but please, Victoria interrupted, her voice more vulnerable than she intended. I'd really like that more than anything. Marcus studied her face for a long moment, seeing something genuine and desperate there. Okay, but somewhere Emma-friendly. Nothing too formal. I know just the perfect place, Victoria smiled. After they left, Victoria found herself making phone calls she'd never imagined making. She contacted her doctor friend, Dr. Sarah Chen, asking detailed questions about pediatric oncologists. She researched children's charities, cutting-edge treatment options, experimental therapies available only at the most exclusive medical centers. For the first time in her adult life, Victoria Sterling was thinking seriously about someone other than herself and her business empire, and it felt like the most natural, important thing in the world. She was falling in love, not just with Marcus, though his kindness and strength drew her like a powerful magnet. She was falling deeply in love with the idea of family, of belonging to something infinitely bigger than quarterly profits and acquisition targets. She was falling in love with a 6-year-old girl who danced fearlessly in a wheelchair and saw the world through eyes unclouded by cynicism or fear. Victoria stared out at the glittering city lights from her office window, but for once, she wasn't thinking about the next deal, the next opportunity to expand her real estate empire. She was thinking about a little girl who might not have many tomorrows, and a father who carried the entire world on his shoulders with grace and unconditional love, and she was thinking about how she might help them both if they'd let her into their lives. The next evening, Victoria stood nervously outside Carmela's, a cozy Italian restaurant in Little Italy, checking her reflection anxiously in the window for the 5th time. She'd chosen a simple blue dress instead of her usual intimidating power suits, and she'd left her hair down for the first time in years, letting it fall naturally around her shoulders. Victoria! Emma's voice carried clearly across the sidewalk as Marcus pushed her wheelchair toward the restaurant. The little girl wore a pretty pink dress and had a fresh white flower tucked behind her ear. You look absolutely beautiful, Victoria said, meaning it completely. So do you. Emma beamed radiantly. Doesn't she look really pretty, Daddy? Marcus's eyes met Victoria's, and she saw something warm and genuinely appreciative there. Very beautiful, he said softly, his voice carrying undertones that made her heart race. Inside, the restaurant owner, Mrs. Antonelli, fussed over Emma like she was her own beloved granddaughter. Such a pretty little princess. And what a lovely family you make. Victoria felt her cheeks flush at the assumption, but didn't correct it. Neither did Marcus, she noticed. Over dinner, Emma chattered enthusiastically about everything. Her favorite books, the stray cats that lived behind their apartment building, her ambitious dreams of becoming a ballerina astronaut veterinarian. Victoria found herself hanging on every word, asking genuine questions, truly engaged in a way she hadn't been with another person in years. Tell me about your work, Victoria, Marcus said as Emma concentrated seriously on twirling spaghetti around her fork. It's complicated, Victoria said carefully. I buy buildings, renovate them completely, sell them for significantly more than I paid. It's all about finding potential where others see only problems. Like people? Marcus asked quietly, his insight cutting straight through her. Victoria looked up, startled by the profound observation. I never thought of it that way. Daddy sees potential in everyone, Emma piped up cheerfully. That's why he adopted me when nobody else wanted a sick little girl. Victoria's fork clattered against her plate. Adopted? Marcus's face went carefully neutral. Emma's birth parents, they couldn't handle having a sick child. They surrendered their parental rights when she was first diagnosed. Victoria stared at this remarkable man who had chosen to love a dying child, who worked exhausting nights to pay for treatments for a daughter he'd chosen rather than been given by biology. Her own privileged complaints about loneliness seemed pathetically small in comparison. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, she whispered. Daddy saved me, Emma said matter-of-factly, returning to her pasta. And now I save him right back by being the best daughter ever. After dinner, they walked slowly through the charming neighborhood, Emma pointing out interesting shop windows while Marcus pushed her chair with infinite patience. Victoria found herself matching their leisurely pace, in absolutely no hurry to end this perfect evening. Victoria? Emma said suddenly, her voice unusually serious. Do you think Do you think when I get to heaven I'll be able to dance with my legs again? The question hit Victoria like a physical blow. Marcus stopped walking abruptly, his knuckles turning white on the wheelchair handles. Emma, Victoria knelt beside the chair, taking the little girl's hands in hers. I think when you get to heaven you'll be able to do anything your heart desires. But right now you're here with us and that's exactly where you belong. Emma smiled brilliantly. That's what I think too. Besides, I'm not ready to go anywhere yet. Daddy needs me and now you need me too. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Yes, she whispered. I need you both more than you could possibly know. That night, Victoria lay awake in her penthouse, staring at the ceiling while city lights painted patterns on her walls. For the first time in 11 years, she wasn't thinking about tomorrow's meetings or next quarter's projections. She was thinking about a little girl who might not live to see her 7th birthday, and a man who loved her enough to move mountains. And she was thinking about how she could use her wealth and connections to move a few mountains herself, because Emma Thompson deserved every possible tomorrow. And Victoria Sterling was going to make absolutely sure she got them. Victoria spent the entire weekend researching pediatric cancer treatment like she once researched real estate markets, with obsessive thoroughness and unlimited resources. She called in favors from powerful connections, made discreet inquiries through her network of influential contacts, and by Monday morning, she had compiled a comprehensive list of the top specialists in the country. Dr. Michael Rodriguez at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia had pioneered a revolutionary new treatment protocol with an unprecedented 87% success rate in cases similar to Emma's. He was booked solid for the next 8 months, with a waiting list of desperate families. Victoria made one strategic phone call to a board member whose real estate portfolio she'd personally managed for 5 years. Tuesday evening, she waited in the lobby with unusual nervousness, checking her phone repeatedly. When Marcus and Emma arrived, she could barely contain her excitement. I have something very important to tell you both, she said, kneeling beside Emma's wheelchair with barely suppressed energy. Are you going to marry Daddy? Emma asked innocently. Victoria's face flushed crimson while Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. Emma, you can't just ask people. It's okay, Victoria laughed, though her heart was racing unexpectedly. That's not what I wanted to tell you. Emma, how would you feel about meeting a very special doctor? Marcus tensed immediately, his protective instincts flaring. Victoria, we can't afford any experimental treatments. Dr. Rodriguez wants to see Emma this Thursday morning, in Philadelphia. All expenses paid, including travel and accommodation. The silence stretched for endless seconds. Marcus stared at her, his face cycling through disbelief, desperate hope, and something that looked almost like anger. Victoria, we absolutely can't accept. Yes, you can, she said firmly. Emma, Dr. Rodriguez has helped lots of children get completely better. He's really excited to meet you and discuss your treatment options. Will he help me dance better? Emma asked with innocent optimism. I think he'll help you dance however you want to, Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. Marcus was unusually quiet during their dance session that night, going through the familiar motions but clearly lost in overwhelming thoughts. Emma, oblivious to the underlying tension, spun and laughed as usual, her joy infectious despite everything. When Emma dozed off peacefully in her wheelchair, exhausted from the day's chemotherapy treatment, Marcus finally spoke. Why? He asked quietly, his voice barely audible. Because she deserves every possible chance, Victoria said simply. We're not your responsibility, we barely know each other, Victoria looked at this incredibly proud man who was trying so hard to maintain his dignity, while his daughter's life hung precariously in the balance. Marcus, she said softly, moving closer to him, 3 weeks ago, I thought success meant having the biggest bank account and the most impressive office in Manhattan. Then I met you both and I realized I've been living my entire adult life in a beautiful empty shell. She moved even closer to him, her voice dropping to a whisper. Emma changed my life in ways I can't even begin to explain. She taught me what real courage looks like, what unconditional love truly means. If I can give her a chance at more birthdays, more dances, more dreams coming true, how is that not the best possible use of everything I've worked for? Marcus's voice cracked slightly. What if the treatment doesn't work? What if we give her hope and what if it does work? Victoria interrupted passionately. What if in 6 months Emma is running around a playground instead of sitting in that wheelchair? What if she lives to become that ballerina astronaut veterinarian she talks about constantly? Marcus looked down at his sleeping daughter, her face peaceful and trusting even in sleep, the flower still tucked behind her ear. "She's not just fighting for her life anymore," Victoria continued, her voice filled with determination. "She's fighting for our future, too. All three of us together." Marcus raised his eyes to meet hers, and Victoria saw the exact moment he stopped fighting her generosity and started hoping instead. "Thursday morning," he said quietly, his voice filled with new possibility. "Thursday morning," Victoria confirmed, reaching out to squeeze his hand gently. As she watched Marcus gently wake Emma and prepare to take her home, Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Purpose beyond profit, meaning beyond success, hope beyond her wildest dreams. She was no longer just Victoria Sterling, the ice queen of Manhattan real estate. She was about to become part of something infinitely more important. She was about to become family, and nothing would ever be the same again. Thursday morning arrived with the crisp promise of autumn in Philadelphia. Victoria had arranged for a private jet, but Marcus insisted they fly commercial, his pride still intact despite accepting her help. Emma pressed her face against the airplane window, marveling at the clouds below. "Look, Daddy, we're dancing with the sky," she exclaimed, her wheelchair secured beside their seats. Dr. Rodriguez's office at Children's Hospital was warm and inviting, decorated with colorful artwork from young patients. Emma immediately gravitated toward a painting of a ballerina in a rainbow tutu. "That's beautiful," Victoria said, kneeling beside her. "Maya painted that," Dr. Rodriguez said, entering with a warm smile. "She's 8 now, completely cancer-free, and just started advanced ballet classes." Marcus's eyes filled with hope he'd been afraid to feel. Dr. Rodriguez examined Emma thoroughly, his gentle manner putting her at ease. "Tell me about dancing, Emma. I hear you're quite the performer." "I dance with my heart," Emma said seriously. "Even when my legs don't work, my heart always knows the steps." After extensive tests, Dr. Rodriguez met privately with Marcus and Victoria. Emma's case is challenging but not hopeless. Her leukemia has a specific genetic marker that responds exceptionally well to our new CAR T-cell therapy. "What does that mean?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with tension. "We extract Emma's own immune cells, reprogram them to fight the cancer, then reintroduce them. The success rate for her specific subtype is 92%. Victoria felt her heart stop. 92%. "The treatment is intensive, 6 weeks here in Philadelphia, but if successful, Emma could be in complete remission within 3 months. Marcus stared at the floor, overwhelmed. "The cost is completely covered," Victoria said firmly. "Whatever it takes." Dr. Rodriguez smiled. "There's something else. We have a small apartment on site for families during treatment. Emma would have access to our art therapy, music therapy, and yes, our adaptive dance program." Emma's eyes lit up when they told her. "Real dancing? With other kids?" "Real dancing with kids who understand exactly what you're going through," Dr. Rodriguez confirmed. That evening, in their hotel room, Emma fell asleep between Marcus and Victoria as they watched her favorite movie. Victoria found herself studying the little girl's peaceful face, memorizing every detail. "I'm scared," Marcus whispered in the darkness. Victoria reached across Emma to touch his hand. "Me too. But look at her. She's not scared at all. She trusts everyone completely. Sometimes I think that's her superpower." "Maybe it is," Victoria said softly. "Maybe that's how she'll beat this." In the morning, they met with the treatment team. The process would begin immediately. Emma would need a central line placed, daily medications, and constant monitoring. "I want to stay," Victoria announced suddenly. "For the entire 6 weeks." Marcus looked shocked. "Victoria, you can't abandon your business. I can run my company from anywhere. Emma needs us both." Dr. Rodriguez's nurse Sarah knelt beside Emma's wheelchair. "Are you ready to become one of our warrior princesses?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Will it hurt?" "Sometimes," Sarah said honestly. "But you'll never be alone, and at the end you'll be stronger than ever." As they prepared Emma for her first treatment, Victoria watched Marcus hold his daughter's hand, whispering words of encouragement. She realized she was witnessing the purest form of love, a father willing to watch his child suffer in order to save her life. "Victoria," Emma called softly, "will you and Daddy dance for me during the treatment? It helps when I'm scared." Victoria looked at Marcus, seeing her own determination reflected in his eyes. "Every day, sweetheart. We'll dance every single day." The first week of treatment tested everyone's limits. Emma's tiny body fought against the powerful medications, leaving her nauseated and exhausted. But every afternoon at 3 o'clock, Victoria and Marcus transformed the small hospital room into a dance floor. Other children began gathering in the doorway, watching from their wheelchairs and hospital beds. Soon, nurses joined in, then doctors during their breaks. Emma's room became the heart of the pediatric ward. "You're creating something beautiful here," Dr. Rodriguez told Victoria during one of Emma's treatments. "These children need hope as much as medicine." Victoria had been working on her laptop when she noticed Emma watching her intently. "What is it, sweetheart? Are you sad because you're not home?" Victoria closed her laptop completely. "Emma, home isn't a place. Home is where the people you love are. So we're all home together?" "Yes," Victoria said, her voice thick with emotion. "We're all home together." Marcus overheard from the hallway, where he'd been speaking with other parents. When he returned, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," he whispered to Victoria, "for giving her a family. For giving us a family," Victoria corrected. By the second week, Emma's white blood cell counts began improving dramatically. Dr. Rodriguez was cautiously optimistic, but warned them the real test would come later. Emma had befriended her roommate, a 7-year-old boy named Tyler who was recovering from brain surgery. Together they planned elaborate dance performances for the other patients. "Victoria," Emma said one evening as they watched the sunset from her window, "Tyler's mommy can't stay with him because she has to work. Can we adopt him too?" Victoria's heart clenched. "It doesn't work that way, sweetie. But families help each other, right? We could help Tyler's family." That night, Victoria found herself researching Tyler's situation. His mother was a single parent, struggling to keep her job while her son battled cancer. Victoria made a discreet phone call to the hospital's social worker. Marcus found her in the family lounge at midnight, still on her laptop. "You can't save everyone," he said gently, sitting beside her. "I can try," Victoria replied. "Emma's teaching me that love isn't limited. The more you give, the more you have. That's a dangerous philosophy for someone with your resources." Victoria looked at him seriously. "Marcus, what if we started a foundation for families like Tyler's, like yours used to be? What if we could help other children get the treatment they need?" Marcus stared at her. "You're serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." The third week brought complications. Emma developed a fever that spiked dangerously high. For 2 terrifying days she drifted in and out of consciousness while Victoria and Marcus maintained a constant vigil. "Talk to her," the nurse encouraged. "She can hear you." Victoria leaned close to Emma's ear. "Remember our first dance, sweetheart? You taught me that dancing isn't about perfect steps. It's about feeling the music in your heart. Your heart is so strong, Emma. Stronger than any medicine." Marcus took Emma's other hand. "Princess, we need you to fight. Victoria and I, we need our best dancing partner." Emma's eyes fluttered open. "Did I miss dance time?" Victoria laughed through her tears. "Never. We never missed dance time." That afternoon, even though Emma could barely lift her head, they danced. Victoria and Marcus swayed gently beside her bed while Emma moved her fingers to the rhythm, conducting their movements like a tiny orchestra director. Dr. Rodriguez watched from the doorway, amazed. "In 20 years of pediatric oncology, I've never seen anything quite like this." By week 4, Emma's recovery accelerated dramatically. Her appetite returned, her energy improved, and most importantly, her smile was brighter than ever. "The treatment is working beyond our best projections," Dr. Rodriguez announced during their weekly meeting. "Emma's response has been extraordinary." That evening, Emma insisted on a celebration dance party in the common room. Children from across the ward joined in, some in wheelchairs, others trailing IV poles, all moving to the music with pure joy. Victoria watched Marcus spin Emma's wheelchair as other families clapped along, and realized this was what happiness looked like. Not the cold satisfaction of a successful business deal, but the warm chaos of people who chose to love each other. "You know what the best part is?" Emma whispered to Victoria during a quiet moment. "What's that, sweetheart?" "We're going to dance at my wedding someday, all 3 of us together." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, we are, I promise." Week 5 brought the most critical phase of treatment. Emma's new immune cells were working, but her body was exhausted from the intensive therapy. She slept more, spoke less, but never missed their daily dance sessions. "I had a dream last night," Emma told Victoria during one of their quiet moments. "I dreamed I was dancing on a big stage and you and Daddy were in the audience clapping." "That wasn't a dream, sweetheart, that was a preview." Dr. Rodriguez had been monitoring Emma's progress closely. The final test results would determine if the treatment had been successful or if they needed to explore other options. Victoria found herself praying for the first time since her parents' death, not to any specific deity but to whatever force in the universe might be listening. Marcus spent his days researching dance schools for children with disabilities, planning for Emma's future with an optimism that both inspired and terrified Victoria. "What if the treatment doesn't work?" Victoria asked him one evening. "Then we love her completely for whatever time we have," Marcus replied simply. "But it's going to work. I can feel it." Tyler's mother, Mrs. Chen, approached Victoria in the family lounge. Thanks to Victoria's discreet intervention, she'd been able to take leave from work to stay with her son. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. "Love your son. That's all the thanks I need. Emma talks about you constantly. She says you're proof that angels don't always have wings." Victoria smiled through her own tears. "Emma's the angel. I'm just learning how to fly." The test results came back on a Friday morning. Dr. Rodriguez called them into his office with an expression Victoria couldn't read. "Please sit down," he said formally. Emma climbed onto Marcus's lap while Victoria gripped the arms of her chair. "Emma," Dr. Rodriguez said, looking directly at the little girl, "how would you like to go home and start planning your comeback dance performance?" The room erupted. Marcus sobbed openly while Victoria laughed and cried simultaneously. Emma looked confused by all the emotion. "Does this mean I'm better?" she asked. "This means you're in complete remission," Dr. Rodriguez explained. "The cancer is gone, Emma. All of it." Emma considered this seriously. "So I can dance with my legs again?" "With time and physical therapy, yes. Your legs should work perfectly." That afternoon, the entire pediatric ward celebrated Emma's recovery. Nurses brought cake, other families joined the party, and Emma held court from her wheelchair like the princess she'd always been. "Victoria," she said during the festivities, "now that I'm better, will you still want to be my family?" Victoria knelt beside the wheelchair, taking Emma's small hands in hers. "Emma Thompson, nothing in this world could make me stop being your family. Nothing." "Good," Emma said matter-of-factly, "because I already picked out your dress for when you marry Daddy." Marcus choked on his cake while Victoria turned crimson. "Emma." "What?" "You love each other. I can tell because you look at each other the same way Daddy looks at me." That evening, as they packed Emma's belongings, Victoria found Marcus standing alone on the hospital balcony, looking out at the city lights. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, joining him. "I was thinking about the night we met," Marcus said. "If someone had told me then that this beautiful, successful woman would become the most important person in my daughter's life, in our lives, I would never have believed it." Victoria moved closer to him. "If someone had told me I'd find my family in a janitor and his 6-year-old daughter, I would have had them committed." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city below. "Marcus," Victoria said softly, "Emma was right, you know, about us." Marcus turned to look at her. "Victoria, I love you," she said simply. "I love you both, more than I thought possible." Marcus cupped her face gently in his hands. "I love you too. God help me, I've loved you since that first night you joined our dance." When they kissed, Victoria felt like she was finally coming home after years of wandering in the wilderness. From inside the room, Emma's voice called out, "I knew it! Tyler owes me $5. They broke apart, laughing. "How long has she been planning this?" Victoria asked. "Since the day she met you," Marcus replied. "Emma always knows these things before the rest of us." 6 months later, Emma stood at the bar in Miss Catherine's dance academy, her legs strong and steady. Victoria watched from the observation window as Emma performed a perfect plie, her face glowing with concentration and joy. "She's remarkable," Miss Catherine said, joining Victoria. "In all my years of teaching, I've never seen a child fight so hard to get back to dance." "She's remarkable in every way," Victoria agreed. The academy had become Victoria's latest investment, not for profit, but for purpose. She'd purchased the struggling studio and transformed it into a specialized program for children recovering from serious illnesses. Marcus finished his shift at the hospital where he now worked as a patient advocate, helping other families navigate the complex world of pediatric medicine. Dr. Rodriguez had personally recommended him for the position after witnessing his dedication during Emma's treatment. "How's our ballerina today?" Marcus asked, wrapping his arms around Victoria from behind. "Perfect. Absolutely perfect." They'd been married for 3 months in a small ceremony at the hospital chapel. Emma had served as both flower girl and maid of honor, insisting that Victoria wear the dress she'd picked out months earlier. "Daddy, Victoria, watch this," Emma called from across the studio. She executed a flawless pirouette, her face radiant with accomplishment. The other children in the class, all survivors themselves, applauded enthusiastically. "That's my daughter," Victoria whispered, still amazed by how naturally the word came now. "Our daughter," Marcus corrected gently. The Sterling Thompson Foundation had officially launched the previous month, with Emma as its youngest board member. They'd already helped 12 families access treatment for their children, with many more applications pending. "Victoria," Emma said during their drive home, "I have an idea for the foundation." "What's that, sweetheart?" "What if we taught other sick kids to dance, not just when they get better, but while they're still fighting?" Victoria exchanged a look with Marcus in the rearview mirror. "That's a brilliant idea. What would we call this program?" Emma considered seriously. "Dancing Through the Storm, because sometimes you have to dance even when it's raining." That evening, they danced in their living room as they did every night, a tradition that had followed them from the hospital lobby to their new home. Emma's movements were strong and fluid now, but the joy remained exactly the same. "I love our new house," Emma said, spinning between her parents. "But I love our family most." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. Their journey had been unexpected, challenging, and absolutely perfect. "Emma," she said, "do you remember what you told me the first night we danced? That everyone can dance? That, and something else. You said dancing is about feeling the music in your heart." Emma nodded. "That's still true. Well, I want you to know that meeting you and Daddy taught me how to hear that music again. You saved my heart." Emma hugged Victoria tightly. "We saved each other. That's what families do." As they prepared for bed, Emma made an announcement. "I've decided what I want to be when I grow up. A ballerina, astronaut, veterinarian?" Marcus asked with a smile. "No," Emma said seriously. "I want to be like Victoria. I want to help families find each other." Victoria's throat tightened with emotion. "That's the most beautiful dream I've ever heard." Later, after Emma was asleep, Victoria and Marcus sat on their back porch watching the stars. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't decided to check on us that night?" Marcus asked. Victoria considered the question. "I try not to. This timeline is the only one that matters." "No regrets about leaving your old life behind?" Victoria laughed softly. "Marcus, I didn't leave my old life behind. I finally started living." A year ago, Victoria Sterling had been the loneliest successful person in Manhattan. Tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, surrounded by love, purpose, and the sweet sound of her daughter's peaceful breathing in the room above. She'd learned that the most valuable acquisition wasn't a building or a company. It was a family, and the most profitable investment wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in love. 2 years after Emma's recovery, the Sterling Thompson Foundation had grown into a national organization. Victoria stood before a crowd of 500 donors at their annual gala, but her eyes were fixed on one special table in the front. Emma, now 8 and glowing with health, sat between Marcus and Tyler, who had become like a little brother to her. Tyler's mother, Mrs. Chen, worked as the foundation's family liaison coordinator. Several other families they'd helped over the years filled the surrounding tables. 3 years ago, Victoria began her speech, "I thought I knew what success looked like. I measured it in profit margins and acquisition targets. Tonight I want to tell you about a different kind of success." She gestured toward Emma's table. "Success is watching a little girl who was told she might never walk again perform in her first dance recital last month. Success is seeing families who thought they had no options discover that they're not alone." The audience listened intently as Victoria shared their story. The late-night dances in the hospital lobby, the terrifying weeks of treatment, the moment they became a family. The Sterling Thompson Foundation has helped over 200 children access life-saving treatment. But more importantly, we've learned that healing happens not just in hospitals but in communities and connections, in the simple act of choosing to care for one another. Emma stood on her chair and waved, making the audience chuckle. Victoria blew her a kiss. "Our newest initiative, Dancing Through the Storm, now operates in 15 children's hospitals across the country. Because sometimes, when you're fighting for your life, you need to remember that life is still worth celebrating." After the gala, they returned home to find a special surprise waiting. Dr. Rodriguez had flown in from Philadelphia with news about their latest research breakthrough. "Emma's case study has helped us develop an even more effective treatment protocol," he announced. "Her recovery has literally saved other children's lives." Emma listened seriously to the medical explanation, then asked, "So helping me helped other kids too?" "Exactly," Dr. Rodriguez confirmed. "That's good," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Daddy always says the best gifts are the ones you can share." Later that evening, as they sat in the garden behind their house, Emma made an announcement that surprised everyone. "I want to visit the kids in the hospital tomorrow, the ones who are scared and don't know if they'll get better." "Are you sure, sweetheart?" Victoria asked. "It might be difficult to see other children going through what you experienced." Emma nodded firmly. "They need to know that someone who understands is thinking about them, and maybe we could dance with them, if they want to." The next day, they returned to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, not as patients this time, but as visitors bringing hope. Emma moved through the pediatric ward like a tiny ambassador of possibility, sharing her story with children who needed to believe in tomorrow. In one room, they met a little boy named Jamie, who reminded Victoria painfully of Emma during her sickest days. He was 5 years old and had been fighting leukemia for 6 months. "Do you really dance?" Jamie asked Emma weakly. "Want me to show you?" Emma replied, immediately beginning a gentle, graceful routine that she'd adapted for the small space. Jamie's eyes lit up with wonder. "That's beautiful." "Your turn," Emma said, sitting beside his bed. "You can dance with just your hands if that's all that feels good today." Victoria watched her daughter, their daughter, teach this frightened little boy that he could still find joy even in the darkest moments. It was exactly what Emma had done for Victoria 3 years ago. Marcus slipped his hand into Victoria's. "She's going to change the world, isn't she?" "She already has," Victoria whispered. That evening, Jamie's mother approached them in the hospital corridor. "Thank you," she said simply. "Jamie hasn't smiled in weeks. What Emma did today, it gave him hope." "Emma gave us all hope," Victoria replied. As they drove home, Emma was unusually quiet in the back seat. "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" Marcus asked. "I was thinking about before I got sick," Emma said. "I don't remember being scared then, but I don't remember being really happy either." Victoria turned in her seat to look at her daughter. "What do you mean?" "Being sick was terrible," Emma said thoughtfully. "But it also brought us together, and now we help other families find each other too. So maybe even bad things can turn into good things if you love each other enough." Victoria felt tears sting her eyes. This wise, beautiful child continued to amaze her every day. "Emma," she said softly, "that might be the most intelligent thing anyone has ever said." "Really?" Emma brightened. "Does that mean I can stay up an extra hour tonight?" Marcus laughed. "Nice try, philosopher. Bedtime is still bedtime." As they tucked Emma into bed that night, she had one more surprise for them. "I know what I want for my birthday next month," she announced. "What's that?" Victoria asked. "I want us to adopt Tyler officially, and maybe Jamie too when he gets better. I want our family to be as big as our hearts." Victoria looked at Marcus, seeing her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. Their family had started with a chance encounter in a corporate lobby, but it had grown into something neither of them could have imagined. "We'll talk about it," Marcus said gently. "That's parent code for yes," Emma said wisely, making them both laugh. That night, Victoria lay in bed thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. She'd started as a woman who had everything money could buy but nothing that truly mattered. Now she had everything that mattered most. And the best part was knowing that their story was still being written. One dance, one day, one act of love at a time. Emma's 9th birthday party was unlike any celebration Victoria had ever imagined hosting. Their backyard was filled with children from the Foundation's programs, hospital staff who had become family, and the extended network of people whose lives had been touched by their journey. Tyler, now officially adopted and thriving after his own successful treatment, helped Emma blow out the candles on her elaborate ballet-themed cake. Jamie, whose treatment had been successful thanks to the new protocol Emma's case had helped develop, spun in circles with pure joy. "Make a wish, princess," Marcus encouraged. Emma closed her eyes tightly, then opened them with a brilliant smile. "I wished for everyone to be as happy as we are right now." "That's a pretty big wish," Victoria said, hugging her daughter close. "The biggest wishes are the most important ones," Emma replied with the wisdom that continued to astound everyone who knew her. Dr. Rodriguez had traveled from Philadelphia for the celebration, bringing news that made the day even more special. "The Dancing Through the Storm program has been so successful that we're implementing it internationally," he announced to the gathered crowd. "Emma's idea is going to help children around the world." Emma beamed with pride. "Daddy, does this mean kids in other countries will learn that they can dance even when they're scared?" "That's exactly what it means," Marcus confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. As the afternoon wound down and guests began to leave, Victoria found herself standing at the kitchen window, watching Emma and Tyler chase butterflies in the garden, while while Jamie's parents thanked Marcus for helping them navigate their son's treatment. Mrs. Chen approached carrying a stack of letters. "These came to the foundation office this week," she said. "Letters from families whose children are in the dance program." Victoria read through them with tears in her eyes. Story after story of children finding hope and healing through movement, families discovering strength they didn't know they possessed, medical staff inspired by the simple power of joy in the midst of suffering. "Emma started something incredible," Mrs. Chen said softly. "Emma started a revolution," Victoria corrected. "She proved that healing isn't just about medicine. It's about connection, community, and the courage to keep dancing even when the music seems to stop." That evening, after all the guests had gone home and the boys were asleep in their rooms, Victoria and Marcus found Emma in her bedroom, already in her pajamas but sitting at her window, looking out at the stars. "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" Victoria asked, sitting beside her on the bed. "I was thinking about that night when we first danced together," Emma said. "Do you remember what you told me? That the most beautiful ballerinas are the ones who dance with their whole heart," Victoria recalled. Emma nodded. "I think we've all learned how to do that now. Dance with our whole hearts, I mean." Marcus joined them on the bed, completing their circle. "Emma, you've taught us that there are many different kinds of dancing. There's the dancing we do with our bodies, but there's also the dancing we do with our lives." "What do you mean?" Emma asked, curious. "I mean the way we move through the world with grace and kindness," Victoria explained. "The way we lift each other up when someone falls. The way we choose love even when it's difficult." Emma considered this seriously. "So, helping other families is like dancing." "The most beautiful kind of dancing," Marcus confirmed. Emma curled up between her parents just as she had during those long nights in the hospital. But now, instead of fear and uncertainty, their quiet moments were filled with gratitude and unshakable love. "Victoria," Emma said sleepily, "I'm glad you were lonely that night you found us dancing." Victoria's breath caught. "Why, sweetheart?" "Because if you hadn't been lonely, you might not have come downstairs, and then we never would have become a family." Victoria looked at Marcus over Emma's head, seeing the same wonder in his eyes that she felt in her heart. Their daughter had just articulated the beautiful paradox of their love story, that sometimes you have to be lost before you can be found, lonely before you can truly appreciate belonging. "Emma," Victoria whispered, "you've given me the greatest gift anyone could ever receive." "What's that?" "You taught me that love multiplies when you share it. The more people we help, the more love we have. The bigger our family gets, the stronger we become." Emma smiled sleepily. "That's the secret of dancing with your whole heart. There's always room for one more person on the dance floor." As Emma drifted off to sleep, Victoria reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. 3 years ago, she had been a successful businesswoman with an empty heart and a sterile life. Tonight, she was surrounded by the messy, beautiful chaos of a family that had chosen each other, a foundation that was changing lives around the world, and the deep satisfaction that came from knowing their love story was still being written. She thought about all the children who were dancing tonight in hospitals around the world, finding courage in movement and hope in music. She thought about the families who no longer faced their darkest moments alone, connected now to a community that understood their journey. And she thought about a little girl who had taught the world that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't money or medicine or even miracles. It was love that danced, bold, generous, and absolutely unstoppable. Emma stirred in her sleep, reaching instinctively for both her parents' hands. Even in dreams, she was still bringing them together, still teaching them that the best kind of success was the kind you could share. Victoria closed her eyes and listened to the quiet breathing of her family, the sound of Tyler and Jamie peaceful in their rooms down the hall, and the distant music of a world where more children went to sleep tonight, believing in tomorrow because a little girl had taught them how to dance through any storm. The Ice Queen of Manhattan real estate had finally learned the most important lesson of all. The greatest acquisition was love, and the most profitable investment was in each other. And the dance would go on, growing wider and more beautiful with each new heart that learned to join the rhythm of hope.